Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Saturday, November 2nd, 2024. This is the Excerpt. Today, how the election could shape Trump's legal fate, plus some bitter hiring news, and how the candidates are doing in polls from a major battleground state ahead of Tuesday. Next week's election results could shape Donald Trump's legal fate. I spoke with USA Today Justice Department correspondent Bart Jansen for more. Hi there, Bart.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Thanks for hopping back on, Bart. So, Trump faces sentencing in his New York hush money case for late November. Let's just start there chronologically, Bart. What might an election win or loss mean for this case?
Well, this will be the case that affects most directly. Of course, the New York charges, where he was convicted on 34 counts of falsifying business records for his hiding basically a payment to a porn actress he paid off to remain silent before the 2016 election. The sentencing in that case is scheduled for November 26th. And it's a local case, so it's not a federal case that he could potentially deal with, and how we'll talk about with the federal charges against him. But in this New York case, up to now, the legal policy has been that state cases take a backseat role to federal law. And so if he is elected president, the presumption is that the sentencing would either be postponed until after he serves his 4-year term as president, or that if he is sentenced, that whatever punishment is included, he could potentially get a jail term, or perhaps also instead get a probationary sentence, that would also be postponed until after he serves his 4-year term as president.
All right, so Bart, remind us about the pending federal cases Trump faces, and could he direct the Justice Department to abandon them if he were to win next week?
Well, that's what he has argued, is that he could at least fire Justice Department Special Counsel Jack Smith, who is the prosecutor in both of the federal cases. He has also argued that he could pardon himself, which would make those cases go away. The idea of a pardon is, it's arguable. Some legal experts say that he could absolutely do that, but other legal experts say that you can't pardon yourself because that would be giving a benefit to yourself, which is, in general terms, not allowed under federal law. So there'll be plenty to fight over whether he could do that. But in the meantime, there is a federal case, charges from the January 6th incident, that he basically is accused in Washington of a conspiracy to overturn the 2020 election results and also obstruct Congress by sending a mob to the Capitol that temporarily halted the count of Electoral College votes. So those charges are still pending. If Trump were to win, we'd have to see whether he fires Prosecutor Smith, as he has threatened to do, or directs his attorney general to drop those charges. The other federal case that's pending is in Florida. He was charged with mishandling classified documents. The judge in that case, Aileen Cannon, has dismissed those charges, saying that Smith was appointed unlawfully. But Smith has appealed that decision to the 11th Circuit. Again, we'd be waiting to see if he directs the Justice Department to drop those charges or drop the appeal, basically, to try to reinstate those charges. And again, the question is whether he would just fire Smith or have his new attorney general fire Smith. If Trump loses the election, Smith would presumably pursue those charges and pursue that appeal at the 11th Circuit for the classified documents case.
All right, Bart. And of course, there's also Donald Trump's Georgia trial on election racketeering. What's the latest here, and how might Tuesday's results make an impact on the next course of action in this case?
Yet again, if he wins the election on Tuesday, the Georgia charges are presumably postponed until after he serves his 4-year term. But if he loses, then the Georgia case would potentially continue to go forward. The next date that we have in that case is a December 5th Georgia Court of Appeals hearing. about whether the prosecutor, Fannie Willis, the Fulton County District Attorney, should be removed from the case because of her romantic relationship with another prosecutor in that case. Trump has argued that she has a conflict of interest and so should be removed, but Willis is trying to remain in charge of that case. The hearing is scheduled, whether he wins or loses. If he wins the White House again, that case will be postponed until after he serves his 4-year term. But if he loses the election, that case could go forward. We have to wait and see whether the prosecutor gets to remain on that case.
All right. Bart Jansen covers the Justice Department for USA Today. All eyes on Tuesday, Bart. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Employers added just 12,000 jobs in October as hiring slowed down substantially. The total was expected to be constrained by 2 major hurricanes and several worker strikes, but the tally was far lower than what was estimated, and job gains for previous months were revised sharply downward, raising concerns about a weakening labor market. The unemployment rate held steady, though, at 4.1%. The report gives a final portrait of the economy just days before next week's historic election and key Federal Reserve meeting. But the temporary hurdles will likely make it challenging for Fed officials to get a reading of the labor market's underlying health, according to economists. In election news, as we enter the final days before Tuesday, the Supreme Court yesterday declined to block Pennsylvania from counting some provisional ballots in the election, a decision potentially affecting thousands of votes in the battleground state. The court rejected the Republican Party's emergency request to intervene after the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said voters should be able to cast provisional ballots if they failed to encase an absentee ballot in a required secrecy sleeve. State and national Republicans argued that would give voters an unauthorized do-over for naked ballots or for other mistakes on mail-in votes. Pennsylvania is arguably the most important of the 7 battleground states that will decide the presidential election, and polls show an exceedingly close race there. Harris and Trump are tied with 49% of the vote each, according to a new exclusive USA Today Suffolk poll. Meanwhile, U.S. intelligence agencies confirmed yesterday they believe Russia is behind a fake but viral video of a man claiming to be a recent Haitian immigrant, saying he and a friend were voting twice in Georgia for Kamala Harris. In the joint statement, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the FBI, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency said they assessed that Russian influence actors also manufactured a video falsely accusing an individual associated with the Democratic presidential ticket of taking a bribe from a U.S. entertainer. Friday's disclosure follows the ODNI's public attribution of 3 other fake videos in recent weeks to Russia. On September 27, 2024, Hurricane Helene struck the southeastern United States with fierce winds and heavy rains. While the coastal areas were expected to take the brunt of the hit, the storm ended up dumping torrential rain in western North Carolina, where it wreaked havoc on small mountain towns and villages. USA Today, in partnership with the Asheville Citizen-Times, spent time in several North Carolina communities to understand how people are coping physically and mentally since Helene ravaged homes, businesses, roadways, and livelihoods. The result is Healing After Helene, a 20-minute documentary hosted by Zuleika Nathu and produced by both she and Lamar Salter. I spoke with Zuleika to discuss. Zuleika, thank you so much for hopping on today.
Thanks for having me.
So Zuleika, one of your first stops was to Asheville and an arts district that was profoundly impacted by this storm. What kinds of stories did people share with you there?
This is an artist's hub in Asheville, and so it's also a tourist attraction for the city near the French Broad River. And it was leveled. And so the people that I spoke with there, I think were still in a bit of shock at seeing sometimes in some cases their life's work just destroyed. We met a glass-blowing artist named Allison who took us into her art studio in what was a really beautiful older brick building. There was nothing left of it except the outside shell. And what's more, her studio was on the 2nd floor. So you can imagine how high the water came.
The Asheville Citizen-Times, part of the USA Today network, was based smack dab in the affected area. What were the kinds of issues that this newsroom struggled with in trying to cover this story?
So this newsroom and its reporters were among the first to arrive at many of the disaster scenes, and on top of that, experienced some of the destruction themselves. One reporter said the day after the storm, he had to scale a fallen tree in order to exit his apartment just to get to work. They were all trying to conserve gas as well because they didn't know how they'd have to manage, whether it would even be available over the next couple of days after the storm hit. Another said that the day that the storm hit, the day after was her first day of work. On top of that, a tree fell through the middle of her house. But, they came to do their job. They came to the office, they came to report on the news and help people stay connected, particularly in those early days, because people had no running water, no power, no cell service. So the newspaper and the information it provided became a lifeline for people. And inside the office, when we were there was still no running water. There was only bottled water. So to use the restroom, you had to literally leave the building, walk several blocks to find the closest porta potty every time you needed to use the restroom. So the Asheville Citizen-Times continues to work under difficult conditions, but they continue to report and tell the stories of their community.
Zuleika, you also spoke with a mental health counselor about the kinds of psychological traumas these communities were experiencing. What surprised you the most?
This is an interesting thread throughout the story because one thing we were told by most people that we spoke with is that the people of Appalachian communities, and yes, that's how you pronounce it, they are very self-reliant. And that was a word that kept coming up. And so, they went to work right away, helping each other shovel mud, remove water, protect from mold. But in those quiet moments, at the end of the day or first thing in the morning, a lot of people said that it really started to hit them, like the sense of loss, the fear of something happening again, the financial implications, all sorts of stressors. And then there was also that gratefulness of surviving with your life intact. And so the mental health expert we spoke with said that processing all of that grief and trauma will take time for people. And what was most surprising is that you're kind of contrasting this iron will that everybody seems to have with almost like a fear of vulnerability, because at some points, people might be afraid that not demonstrating strength means that you're weak, which it doesn't at all. And so allowing people to open up, talk about their experiences with each other, with professionals, is really important, she said, in helping people move forward, because otherwise the trauma of what people saw and maybe still haven't fully metabolized can be with them for years to come.
Zuleika, this is a powerful piece. What would you most like viewers of the doc to walk away with?
That this can happen to anyone. With climate change, changes in our weather patterns, even when you consider urban sprawl, this can happen to anyone because these weren't homes that were, say, near the ocean, right? We look at Florida and we think hurricanes near the ocean. We look at California, forest fires. Maybe they built in areas that they shouldn't be building in. But this was one of those situations where this could have been anyone in the country. This was a mountain area. The people whose homes were destroyed were nowhere near the river. I mean, they were on higher ground. And so it just makes you realize when you start to lose things so significant in your life, like your home or your community or your sense of belonging in some ways, people start to really realize what is actually important to them. And the one thing that kept coming out is that people were grateful that they survived with their lives intact and their family intact, that their loved ones were still okay. And at the end of the day, that was all that mattered to them.
Healing After Helene, North Carolina Rebuilds is available for viewing on usatoday.com, YouTube, and on USA Today's streaming channel. And we have links in today's show notes. Thank you, Zuleika.
Thank you so much.
There have been 2 assassination attempts and a last-minute candidate switch. There are major global wars, some of which are heating up, and there have been threats of violence against election workers. There are also worries about post-election violence. Americans are feeling anxious. What's happening? USA Today national correspondent Trevor Hughes joined my colleague Dana Taylor to share stories from the front lines of the 2024 election. You can find that episode right here beginning at 5 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow on this feed. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your pods, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back Monday with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.